American Revolutions, the United States History Cycle, is a 10-year program of commissioning 37 new plays about moments of change in United States history. We chose the number 37 as a hat tip to William Shakespeare, because the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, we have an affection for Shakespeare, and as also an acknowledgement that the inspiration for the project actually came from Shakespeare. When Bill Rausch, who's the artistic director of the festival, was thinking about sort of wonderful opportunity of perhaps coming to lead this organization, he looked to Shakespeare and said, well, what does Shakespeare do? What might Shakespeare do if he worked at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival? And looking at the way Shakespeare wrote the history of his people onto the stage, and so much of the understanding of the history of that part of the world actually comes from this man's plays, Bill thought, well, why don't we do that? And so here we are.
It's a really extraordinary opportunity that OSF is offering here to explore an arena with a very good chance of being produced that one often doesn't get to in the United States. I think I'm going to be very clear about this, I think there are a lot of writers who write political theater, or theater about government, theater about social conditions. There are not a lot of producers who are willing to step up and produce that, unless you're British, of course. And what OSF is doing is tilting the scale in favor of American writers and American productions.
And the fun dare of the whole endeavor is in our nation's very short history, and yet very full history, what matters most. And that there will be so many answers to that question is thrilling to be part of that. So it's not just my play, but a conversation with other playwrights who are talking about, well, what matters most to us in our history. And of course, for me personally, I think one of the themes that I will never leave, because it matters so deeply in my psyche, in my heart, is simply legacy. And what is our legacy? And I get to, in some ways, have a slightly more curated answer to that through this commission.
What I think about the American Revolutions program, and what I think is so, and excuse the play on words, so revolutionary about it, is that it's centering American history in the middle of a festival that actually celebrates a British playwright. And it kind of gives it equality. It says that in attacking this classical work, our work too, our history too, is as valid. And I found that fascinating when I first heard about the program, and then having to think about how to direct the liquid plane, and what at its core speaks to America today, what at its core speaks to American history as it speaks to today. It's a wonderfully bright and intelligent programming choice.
Our backgrounds, where we come from, we are born and bred in the projects of New York City, the Lower East Side and the South Bronx. We've studied theater in college, but our entrance into American theater was through the open mic scene, poetry scenes of New York City, performance art scenes of PS 122 in New York, and we sort of worked and hustled our way to get here. So just our presence alone is a different conversation in terms of us being as playwrights, as artists, as activists, as community organizers, bringing that voice to this conversation. I think it's very smart on Bill's part, not just that it's us, that you're going to get different people looking at it who have different aesthetic on how they approach theater. So between us being in the room, Lisa Otami being in the room, Christopher Diaz being commissioned, Naomi Wallace, who you know, but how she's looking at getting a commission like this, Lynn Nottage, Robert Schenken. These are, Culture Clash, Young Jung Lee, is so many different types of people who are known by mainstream and not known by mainstream. It's different tiers of people. But for all of us to be tackling this great American conversation is really exciting because it's vastly different.
The Oregon Shakespeare Festival is so willing to kind of take that chance with you. A lot of theaters who commission you might not be as kind of open and willing to go in whichever direction you want to go and be more controlling of the product. I think that Oregon, because of its history in creating new works and diverse works, I think that working with everybody here on staff, with Bill Rausch, Alison Carey, Lisa Tommy, everybody that was involved was just willing to go that extra mile in the creative process.
Well, what's so great is that OSF really puts a lot of focus on company. And because we've worked together, I've been here for 5 seasons now, and working with these people, there's a trust that's already there. And I think when you're dealing with sensitive subject matter like this, that trust being there right away really is helpful. And what I really like about it is that when you're working on a new play, it's interesting how you as an actor inspire the playwright inspires you. So, we'll read a couple of pages, and based on our reading and our conversations about it, we might have, other pages the next week which sort of reflect what we had talked about in the rehearsal process. So it's a very collaborative effort that I personally like with any new work, but especially this sort of new work that's sensitive subject matter, and specifically in a time period that I feel really connected with.
One of the things that I knew from the beginning was that American Night was going to affect people in a strong way. There's a lot of tricky subject matter in that play, particularly the subject of immigration. And I knew that it was going to be delicate / crazy making. I don't think I recognized how intense that feeling was going to be for people until we started getting audience members. And then on a personal note, I knew the story was impactful. I often thought about my parents when I was in rehearsal and stuff, but it wasn't until closing here at OSF that my parents actually came to see it. And they were extremely, extremely emotionally involved in it. My father, who's very, very, he doesn't overuse his words. He told me afterwards how much the play meant to him because, although his story was different and he immigrated in a different way, to see himself on stage, basically, to see himself and my mother, who he had left behind to come to the U.S., was, I think, really important for him. I think it was also extremely important to see his kid, who was raised as an American citizen, pursuing a life as an artist, reflect that story back to him. I think that that's what American Revolutions does. It pulls out these stories that are part of the fabric of the citizenship of the United States and highlights them in different ways, it's really important that a theater company is doing that, because if it doesn't happen now, when is it going to happen?
So here we are. It's 2 years later, and All the Way is closing its astonishingly successful run on Broadway this Sunday, having set box office records for the history of straight plays on Broadway, and having swept the awards for the entire season in terms of Best Play and Best Actor. I am halfway through the rehearsals for Great Society, which will have its joint world premiere here in Ashland July 27th, and then move to Seattle. That commissioned the play. It's been a crazy, exhilarating, intense, highly anxious, deeply enjoyable ride.
In Ghostlight, playing the character of John Moscone, directed by John Moscone, was quite an interesting challenge, but ultimately unbelievably rewarding, not just as an artist, but as a person. I think what American Revolutions does so beautifully is not only gives audiences and artists the sweep of American history, but gives us the personal, and being able to personalize that moment in our country's history, in San Francisco's history, and in the progressive movement in California's history, and the gay rights movement, and being able to personalize it and what that meant for one individual and one individual's growth was a real honor and a real privilege, being a part of Ghostlight. To be a part of all the way in a production that was birthed here at OSF, and then to be lucky enough to travel with it in its different versions, and then to be in New York and playing to those, incredibly appreciative sold-out houses, and the people that came to see it, the politicians, and, being able to meet the Clintons, and that was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And then seeing how it landed so beautifully and in exactly the same way as the production landed here, to know that connection was universal, was amazing.
Well, one of the things that I really love about the American Revolutionary series is that it really invites us to think epically as playwrights. Traditionally, when you're given a commission, you're told that these are the resources that you have, and you're not necessarily asked to shrink your plays, but you understand that in order for your play to be produced, that it probably has to have between 2 to 5 characters. It can't have too many sets. But I think that what I loved about the American Revolutionary series is that Bill and Alison said, write the play that you want to. Don't worry about the number of characters. Don't worry about the setting. Really think large. And I enjoy that exercise. I think something that's really lovely that the theater did is that they invited us into the community, and that community meant that as playwrights we got to speak to other playwrights who were in the same stages of the process as I was. I think that we so often write in isolation and we struggle with ideas in isolation, but with this particular commission we were invited to sit around a table at these convenings that were held and present our work and talk about our struggles and talk about the things that we had learned through our research. And there were also tools that were provided for us if we got stumped. There were historians who were made available. There were other resources that were made available. And so I felt really supported, not just by the theater, but by the other playwrights who were part of this commissioning process.
Bill Rausch invited me to come to OSF, and I knew that he and Alison were going to embark upon this amazing chapter in American theater history. I literally thought, wow, I'll be able to say I was at OSF when American Revolutions began. And I can't tell you how exciting and honored I am and proud I am to be a part of the legacy that this is to the American theater community as a whole, to OSF. Working on all these plays has not only been about revealing parts of American history that we may not have known about, we may not have learned in school, but it's also about looking at the things that we all know about and seeing them from a different perspective and seeing them from a point of view that we may have never even thought of, and learning things as artists, as citizens,
One of the legacies of American Revolutions, I hope, will be at the end. We will be commissioning plays through 2017. We've done 24 so far. We have 13 more to go. And then the plays will be developed for at least 10 years after that, continue to be developed. And hopefully they'll be produced for decades, if not hundreds of years, just like the works of William Shakespeare are. The legacy I hope we will have created is to look back and say, we treated each one of these plays as its own perfect potential and gave each one of them equal respect and support on its path to existence.
When I think about the spark of the idea to create plays that looked at moments of change in our country's past, and what that little spark, that gleam of an idea has grown into for all of us, for our company, for our audiences, for the field, and that we are leaders in and part of a national movement to examine who we are as a country by looking at where we've come from to better illuminate where we might head in the future. I'm so proud and I'm so energized. I feel like what's beautiful about American Revolutions is that no matter how tragic and how challenging the subject might be, I feel like these projects give hope to us as a nation in terms of how we move forward. And there's just nothing I'd rather be part of.